This is a wrap up of lesson 3.2 prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells, and also lesson 3.3, where we get into talking about cells. So, one thing that you want to do is make sure you review your notes, what makes the difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote, and make sure you answer this question: what is the endosymbiotic theory? And look into that question. So we're going to move and we're going to talk about eukaryotic cell structures. And there's two types of eukaryotic cells. There's animal and plant cells. And this is a picture of a typical animal cell. So what we want to make sure we point out is the main job of eukaryotic cells is to make proteins. It's actually, an important job for the prokaryotic cell as well. The job is to make proteins, because without proteins, life wouldn't exist. And so the cell's going to need energy to do its job. So it also is going to have to make sure that it creates that energy. So to do that, there's a bunch of little tiny structures that work together to help the cell function. And these are called organelles. So when we talk about the word structure, we're talking about how something looks. And when we say function, we talk about how it works or what its job is. So one of the first pieces of a cell we're going to look at, and it's not an organelle, but it is a part of the cell, and it's the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm would be everything here in white within the cell membrane, but does not include the nucleus. So when we talk about other organelles, they're typically in here in the cytoplasm. If it's something that's regarding the nucleus, we usually refer to it as being part of the nucleus. So the cytoplasm is watery and gel-like. And the function of the cytoplasm is the site of chemical reactions. It helps the cell maintain its shape, and it suspends or holds organelles in place. Another part of the cell that's very important, and we actually dedicate an entire next lesson to it, is the cell membrane. The cell membrane, and if you look here, you'll notice it has these two layers of lipids. That's why it's called a phospholipid bilayer. But there's also proteins that are through it. And these green things are cholesterol, and these carbohydrate chains or sugar chains that are attached to proteins in the lipids. So the cell membrane is not just lipids, but here's some names that it's known by: plasma membrane, lipid bilayer, fluid mosaic, and semi-permeable. The cell membranes has a few jobs. It controls what enters and exits the cell, protects the cell, and it supports the cell. Another important structure is the nucleus. So the nucleus itself has several components that you're responsible for understanding. One of the first things to point out is the nucleus has its own membrane, sometimes called the nuclear envelope, that's there to protect what's inside of the nucleus. The nucleus also has pores or small holes that allow material to enter and leave the nucleus. These two terms, chromosomes and chromatin, are referring to the DNA of the cell. DNA, when it is loose and it's not replicating, is called chromatin. When DNA is condensed like this into chromosomes, it's getting ready to replicate. DNA in general holds the instructions to make the proteins. So that was the main job of the cell, was to make proteins. So the instructions are located in here in the nucleus. And again, chromosomes and chromatin, both referring to the DNA, but just different stages or different times where it is organized differently. The nucleolus is usually this darkened center region of the nucleus where ribosomes are made. Now, the ribosomes are made here, but they're going to actually end up and mature out in the cytoplasm. So that's an example of something that can leave through the nuclear pore. So now we're in the cytoplasm, and this is where you're going to find the ribosomes. They're usually shown as little dots in an animal cell or a plant cell model, but they're actually a combination of a small and a large subunit. And their function, their big job it is the site where proteins are made. Okay, or the site of protein synthesis is the scientific term for it. The endoplasmic reticulum is usually found outside of the nucleus. So here's the nucleus. This would be all the cytoplasm out here. In endoplasmic reticulum, there's rough endoplasmic reticulum and smooth. It gets its name for being rough because it has ribosomes attached. So I always remember the RR, ribosomes are attached to the rough ER. The smooth ER does not have any ribosomes attached. It's usually right next to the endoplasmic reticulum, the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And together, this is all kind of known as the endomembrane system. Now, the smooth ER produces lipids, cholesterols, and it detoxifies cells. So it produces some things that the cell is also going to need. An example of an organ is the liver has a lot of smooth ER because one of the liver's job is to detoxify. And so those liver cells would contain a lot of smooth ER because they're going to be very busy. The Golgi apparatus sometimes gets confused with the smooth endoplasmic reticulum because it kind of has that smooth appearance. But one trick is when you see the Golgi apparatus and you see vesicles coming from it, that tells you it's the Golgi, because the Golgi apparatus or the Golgi bodies is responsible for shipping materials to other parts of the cell. So you can see there's an incoming. So it's something like something's dropping something off at this packaging area here, and it's going through and kind of getting packaged and then, shipped out into another. They're called vesicles. And I always think of the word vehicle, like it's going to move something around. Well, that's what vesicles do. The lysosome is an organelle that contains digestive enzymes. So very, very acidic environment inside of this lysosome. And there's a single membrane here that protects the lysosome and is supposed to keep everything inside those strong acidic enzymes. And if the job is to break down material inside. If it breaks, it will kill the cell. So there is a term called apoptosis, which means programmed cell death. And it's kind of what happens if they pop and they're going to actually, it would kill the entire cell because of the acidic environment. The mitochondria is going to be found in both plant and animal cells. It contains its own DNA, has its double membrane here, an inner and an outer membrane. And this is where ATP is going to be made in cellular respiration. You can see all these folds, that gives it more space for cell respiration to take place. The cytoskeleton is a network of microfilaments, intermediate filaments, and microtubules that kind of supports the cell structures that are inside and is all weaved throughout the cytoplasm. The centrioles are found only in animal cells. They kind of look like this if you would draw it in a planar form. They set up where the cell parts go during cell division, and they're going to produce spindle fibers. So we'll talk about these a lot more in Unit 4. And then some parts are found only in plants. Now, animal cells can have vacuoles, but plant cells have extremely large vacuoles. So you can see this is an older plant cell and has a very large vacuole that takes almost, the entire space of the cell, because the job of the vacuole is to store water, waste, and materials, and it also helps make cells a little bit more rigid. So some animal cells that have these are called contractile vacuoles, and they may help pump water out of some cells. Now, this is only found in plant cells, and it's a chloroplast. So all these little green things are chloroplasts here. You can't see any of the other parts of the cell. This is one cell right here, and it's packed with chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are going to capture sunlight energy and can help convert it into glucose. Now, chlorophyll is a pigment found in chloroplasts, which is what makes them green. Chloroplasts also have their own DNA. This goes back to the endosymbiotic theory, and they also have their own membrane. And the cell wall is the last organelle we're going to discuss. Again, found in plants, also found in algae, fungi, and bacteria, but it is not found in animal cells. And the function is to protect the cell, especially from water loss. The cell wall is made up of cellulose. Cellulose was an important polysaccharide or carbohydrate we talked about in Unit 2. And that wraps up for today. We're going to finish this chart tomorrow. You should be able to say cell wall. You should be able to check off if it's found in a plant, animal, or bacteria. You can kind of compare the organelles.